Chapter 1. The Gathering Storm. The autumn wind swept across the rolling hills of Devonshire, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and wood smoke. Harrington Hall stood proudly at the end of a long, tree-lined drive, its Georgian facade glowing warmly in the late afternoon sun. The estate had belonged to the Harrington family for generations, and tonight it would play host to one of the most anticipated social events of the season. Lady Evelyn Harrington, the widowed mistress of the house, had invited a select circle of guests to celebrate her 40th birthday. But the true purpose of the gathering, whispered about in drawing rooms from London to Bath, was the unveiling of the famous Harrington emerald brooch, a jewel of legendary beauty and dubious history. Fashioned in the 18th century for an ancestress who had reportedly worn it at the court of George III, the brooch was a cabochon emerald the size of a pigeon's egg, surrounded by diamonds and mounted in antique gold. Some said it was cursed, others that it was priceless. All agreed it was magnificent. Among the guests arriving that Friday evening was a small, impeccably dressed Belgian with a large egg-shaped head, an extraordinary moustache, and eyes that gleamed with quiet intelligence. Hercule Poirot had accepted Lady Evelyn's invitation with pleasure. He had met her the previous winter in Cairo, where she had spoken with admiration of his methods. "If ever I have a mystery, Monsieur Poirot," she had said lightly, "I shall send for you at once." He had smiled then, little dreaming that within a year he would indeed be summoned, not officially perhaps, but by circumstances that intrigued him. Poirot stepped down from the Rolls-Royce that had brought him from the station and paused to admire the house. Symmetrical, elegant, perfectly proportioned, it pleased his sense of order. A liveried footman took his valise, and he entered the great hall where Lady Evelyn herself waited to greet him. "Monsieur Poirot, how delighted I am that you came." She was a handsome woman, tall and dark-haired, with the poise of one born to privilege. Yet tonight there was a faint strain beneath her smile, a tension in the way she held her shoulders. "Madame, the pleasure is entirely mine," Poirot replied, bowing over her hand. "I have heard much of your beautiful home, and tonight you shall see my greatest treasure," she said, lowering her voice. "The brooch arrives from the bank this afternoon under guard. I confess I am a little nervous. There have been rumours." "Rumours, madam?" "Oh, nothing definite. Anonymous letters suggesting it might be stolen. Foolish threats, no doubt, but they have unsettled me." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "You have informed the police?" She shook her head. "My brother-in-law, Colonel Harrington, insisted we keep it quiet. He believes it is merely someone's idea of a joke, and I did not wish to alarm my guests." Poirot said nothing, but his eyes narrowed thoughtfully. The other guests were already assembling in the drawing-room when Poirot entered. There was Colonel Harrington himself, bluff, red-faced, a retired Indian Army man with a loud voice and a monocle. His wife Mildred, a faded blonde who talked incessantly of horses. Their daughter Clarissa, a sharp-featured girl of 22 who smoked cigarettes in a long holder and regarded the world with weary cynicism. Then there was Lady Evelyn's younger brother, Geoffrey Farrar, charming, improvident, and deeply in debt if the rumours were true. With him had come a friend, Mr. Victor Leland, an art dealer with sleek black hair and restless hands. 2 more guests completed the party. Miss Diana Clements, Lady Evelyn's companion secretary, a quiet, efficient young woman with spectacles and neat brown hair. And finally, a late arrival who caused something of a stir, Mr. Raoul Vavasour, a distant French cousin of the family, who had written only the day before to announce his intention of visiting. Vavasor was tall, dark, and strikingly handsome in a slightly theatrical way. His manners were perfect, his English flawless with only the faintest accent. Yet Poirot, watching him greet his hostess, sensed something not quite right, a watchfulness behind the smile. Dinner was served at 8 in the long gallery, candlelit and magnificent. Conversation flowed easily, hunting, the latest London plays, the unfortunate state of the economy. The brooch was not mentioned until the ladies had withdrawn and the men lingered over port. Colonel Harrington cleared his throat. "Tomorrow evening, gentlemen, Evelyn will show the brooch to everyone after dinner. It's been in the bank vault these 10 years, but she's decided to wear it again. Damned fine stone. Worth a king's ransom." Geoffrey Farrar laughed lightly. "And likely to attract a king's ransom in thieves, what?" "Nonsense," the colonel barked. "House is guarded. Servants all trustworthy. Besides, who'd dare?" Victor Leland leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "I have seen photographs of the brooch, Colonel. The emerald is exceptional. Colombian, I believe, of the finest water. In today's market, it would fetch at least £30,000. A small silence followed this pronouncement. Poirot, sipping his port, observed the faces around the table. Colonel Harrington looked complacent. Geoffrey Farrar faintly amused. Raoul Vavasor interested but detached. Only the art dealer's enthusiasm seemed a shade too professional. Later, as the men joined the ladies in the drawing-room, Poirot found himself beside Miss Clements. "You are uneasy, mademoiselle?" he asked quietly. She started. "Is it so obvious? I suppose it is foolish, but ever since those letters arrived, I have felt watched." "Letters? More than one?" "3 in all, typed anonymous, warning Lady Evelyn not to display the brooch, or it would be taken from her." "And the police?" "Lady Evelyn would not hear of it. She said it would spoil the party." Poirot nodded slowly. "Tell me, mademoiselle, who among the guests knew in advance that the brooch was to be shown?" "Everyone here, I think. It was mentioned in the invitations. And of course the servants knew." At 11 o'clock the party broke up. As Poirot made his way upstairs, he paused on the landing to look down into the hall. The house was quiet now, but he had the unmistakable sensation that something was astir, like the hush before a storm. His bedroom was at the end of the east wing, comfortably furnished with a view over the gardens. A fire burned low in the grate. Poirot performed his nightly ritual, arranging his toilet articles in perfect alignment, twirling his moustaches, donning his dressing-gown of plum-coloured silk. Then he sat by the window and gazed out into the darkness. The grounds were illuminated faintly by a young moon. He could see the outline of the terrace, the yew hedges, the distant gleam of the lake. All seemed peaceful, yet Poirot was not deceived. Somewhere in this house, he felt certain, danger lurked. At precisely 5 minutes past midnight, the lights failed. It was not a gradual dimming, but a sudden total extinction. One moment, the corridor outside his door was lit, the next, complete darkness. From downstairs came a woman's sharp cry, then a confused babble of voices. Poirot did not hesitate. He lit the candle he always kept beside his bed, a habit from years of travelling in less reliable countries, and stepped into the corridor. Others were doing the same, doors opening, flickering lights appearing. He descended the stairs swiftly. In the hall, a knot of people had gathered. Lady Evelyn, very pale in a dressing-gown of silver lame, was clutching her brother's arm. The colonel was shouting orders at the butler. "Find the fuse box, man! Get the lights on!" "It is not the fuses, sir," the butler replied respectfully. "The main switch has been thrown. I have already restored it." As he spoke, the lights blazed on again. Everyone blinked in the sudden glare. Lady Evelyn gave a little gasp. "The brooch! It was in the safe in the library. I went to look at it again before bedtime. The safe door is open." There was a rush towards the library. Poirot followed more slowly, his face grave. The library was a long, handsome room lined with books. In one corner stood a modern steel safe let into the wall. Its door hung open. Inside, on a velvet tray, lay the empty case that had held the emerald brooch. The jewel was gone. Colonel Harrington swore vigorously. Geoffrey Farrar whistled. Raoul Vavasour raised elegant eyebrows. Victor Leland looked stricken. Only Hercule Poirot remained calm. He stepped forward, examined the safe door, the floor, the window, which was firmly closed and bolted from inside. "Interesting," he murmured. "Most interesting." Lady Evelyn turned to him, her face white. "Monsieur Poirot, can you help me? The brooch has been stolen under our very noses." Poirot bowed. "Madame, you do me honour. Hercule Poirot is at your service." In the silence that followed, his green eyes swept the circle of faces. Somewhere among these people, or possibly outside them, was a thief of extraordinary daring. The game, as he liked to say, had begun, and Hercule Poirot never refused a challenge. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Past. The morning after the theft dawned grey and drizzly, with low clouds pressing down upon Harrington Hall like a lid. Breakfast was a subdued affair. The guests assembled in the dining room with the air of people attending a funeral rather than a weekend party. Conversation was limited to polite murmurs about the weather and the excellence of the kedgeree. No one mentioned the empty safe or the vanished brooch. Hercule Poirot, however, was in his element. He ate 2 croissants with precise neatness, drank 3 cups of coffee, and observed everyone with bright, attentive eyes. He noted how Colonel Harrington buttered his toast with unnecessary violence, how Geoffrey Farrar avoided his sister's gaze, how Victor Leland kept glancing toward the door as though expecting an escape route to appear. When the meal ended, Lady Evelyn asked Poirot if he would join her in the library. He agreed at once. The room looked much as it had the previous night, save that the open safe door had now been closed, and a policeman from the local constabulary, a stolid sergeant with a notebook, stood awkwardly in one corner. Inspector Jarvis from Exeter was expected later in the day, but Lady Evelyn had begged Poirot to begin his inquiries immediately. "I cannot bear to think of that jewel lost forever," she said, sinking into a leather armchair. "It has been in our family for over 150 years. My husband wore it in his buttonhole on our wedding day. To lose it like this, in my own house, is intolerable." Poirot seated himself opposite her and arranged the crease in his trousers with care. "Tell me, madame, everything you can about the brooch, its history, its value, its reputation." Lady Evelyn sighed. "The emerald was brought back from India by Sir Reginald Harrington in 1782. He was in the service of the East India Company and, according to family legend, acquired it from a Maharaja in rather dubious circumstances. Some say it was payment for a debt of honour, others that it was stolen. Whatever the truth, it has always carried a hint of scandal. There was even a story that it was cursed, that misfortune would follow any who wore it unlawfully. And has misfortune followed?" She gave a faint smile. My mother-in-law lost her entire fortune in the crash of '29 shortly after wearing it at a ball. My husband died in a hunting accident the year after he inherited it. But such things are coincidence, surely. Poirot stroked his moustache thoughtfully. Coincidence is often the refuge of the uninformed mind. Continue, I pray. The brooch passed to me on my husband's death. I placed it in the bank for safety and have not worn it since. Until this weekend, that is. I thought, foolishly, that it was time to bring it back into the light. Who knew it was coming here? Everyone in the house party, as I told Miss Clements last night. It was mentioned in the invitations. And of course the servants, my maid, the butler, the footman. The bank delivered it yesterday afternoon in an armoured van. 2 guards brought it into this very room and placed it in the safe. I locked it myself and kept the key on a chain around my neck. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The key was on your person at all times? Until bedtime. Then I placed the chain on my dressing table. I sleep lightly, monsieur. No one could have entered my room without waking me. Yet someone opened the safe. Yes, she shivered, and during that 5 minutes of darkness, it is nightmare-like. Poirot rose and walked to the safe. He examined the lock closely, then the floor around it. There were faint scuff marks in the dust, but nothing conclusive. Tell me about your guests, madame. Beginning perhaps with your brother, Mr. Geoffrey Farrar. Lady Evelyn hesitated. Geoffrey is charming, but weak. He has always lived beyond his means. Gambling debts, you know. He has asked me for money several times, but I have refused. The brooch is not part of my personal fortune. It is an heirloom, entailed to pass to my niece Clarissa. Mr. Leland, the art dealer, he is a friend of your brother. Yes, they met in London. Geoffrey hoped Victor might help him sell some family paintings, but nothing came of it. Victor has a great admiration for jewels. He has examined the brooch on a previous occasion and pronounced it magnificent. And Monsieur Vavasour? A distant cousin. We had not met before yesterday. He wrote from Paris saying he was in England and wished to pay his respects. I could hardly refuse. Poirot nodded. Colonel and Mrs. Harrington? My husband's brother and sister-in-law. The Colonel is bluff and honest, sometimes brutally so. Mildred is, well, rather foolish about horses and little else. Clarissa is their only child. She will inherit the brooch one day. And Miss Clements? Entirely trustworthy. She has been with me 5 years. Poirot thanked her and asked permission to interview the others. Lady Evelyn agreed at once, and the sergeant was dispatched to summon them one by one. First came Geoffrey Farrar. He lounged in the armchair with an air of studied nonchalance, lighting a cigarette before speaking. "Rotten business this," he said. "Poor Evelyn's quite cut up. But honestly, Poirot, I can't see it was any of us. Must have been an outside job. Some gang who knew the jewel was here. Yet the window was bolted from inside," Poirot pointed out gently. "And no sign of forced entry." Geoffrey shrugged. "Servants, then? One hears of these things. Your own movements last night, monsieur. Dinner, port, drawing-room, bed. I was talking to Victor most of the evening. Ask him." Poirot made a note. "You are in financial difficulties, I understand." Geoffrey's smile vanished. "Who told you that? Evelyn, I suppose. Look here, I won't pretend I'm flush. Who is these days? But I'm not desperate enough to steal my own sister's jewellery." Next came Victor Leland. The art dealer was nervous, his fingers twisting a signet ring. "A tragedy," he declared. "Such a stone. Irreplaceable. I warned Lady Evelyn it was unwise to bring it here." You knew its value exactly? I appraised it once, at her late husband's request. £30,000 then, more now, perhaps. And last night, I was with Mr. Farrar until the lights failed. Then confusion, voices, people bumping into one another. When the lights returned, I was still in the drawing-room. Poirot regarded him steadily. You collect jewels yourself, monsieur? Only as part of my profession. I deal in fine objects. Raoul Vavasour was calmness itself. He answered questions with courtesy and precision. I arrived late, dined, conversed pleasantly, retired early. The blackout woke me naturally. I came downstairs with the others. Your reason for visiting England? Business in London and a wish to meet my English relations. I had heard of the famous brooch. Who in the family has not? Colonel Harrington blustered. Damned impertinence, questioning us like criminals. The thief's some outsider, mark my words. Probably got in through a window earlier and hid. Yet all windows and doors were secure. The colonel snorted. Servants in league, then. Miss Clements spoke quietly but firmly. She had been in the drawing-room throughout, helping Mrs. Harrington find her glasses when the lights failed. She confirmed that most guests had remained there. Clarissa Harrington was defiant. I think it's all rather thrilling. Much better than another boring weekend. Perhaps the curse has struck again. You believe in the curse, mademoiselle? Of course not, but it makes a good story. After the interviews, Poirot asked to see the gardens. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and the gravel paths damp. He walked slowly, hands behind his back, pausing now and then to examine the ground. Near the library window, he found what he sought. A flower bed where the earth had been disturbed. A small, round indentation suggested something had been pressed into the soil, perhaps the end of a walking stick or umbrella. Nearby lay a scrap of paper, sodden but legible. It was a fragment of a letter, typed on cheap paper, must not be allowed to keep it. Return what was stolen or suffer the consequences. Poirot pocketed it carefully. Returning indoors, he encountered the butler, Graves, a dignified man of 60 with impassive features. Graves, you have been with the family long. 25 years, sir. And the other servants? Most are long-serving. The new parlour-maid, Elsie, has been here only 6 months. There is also a temporary footman engaged for the weekend, James. Poirot's interest quickened. This James, where is he now? He left at dawn, sir. Said his mother was taken ill. The agency sent him. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A temporary servant who vanished immediately after the crime. It was almost too convenient. He returned to the library, deep in thought. The anonymous letters, the family tensions, the vanished footman, the fragment of typed warning, all pointed to careful planning. Yet something eluded him, some vital connection. As he stood by the window, gazing out at the grey gardens, a memory stirred. Victor Leland's restless hands, Raoul Vavasour's watchful eyes, Geoffrey Farrar's forced lightness. And then there was the blackout itself. 5 minutes exactly, long enough for a practiced thief, but requiring precise timing. Poirot twirled his moustache and smiled a small, satisfied smile. The little grey cells were beginning to work. The shadows of the past were lengthening, but Hercule Poirot intended to bring them into the light. Chapter 3. The Alibi Unravels. By mid-morning the following day, Inspector Jarvis had arrived from Exeter, a tall, dour man with a clipped moustache and the cautious manner of a policeman who had learned not to trust country-house gentility. He listened politely while Poirot summarized his preliminary findings, then announced his intention to question everyone again and search the house and grounds thoroughly. Poirot merely bowed. "I am entirely at your service, Inspector, but permit me, I beg, to pursue certain lines of inquiry in my own way." Jarvis grunted agreement, secretly relieved to have the famous Belgian take part of the burden. Poirot began with the alibis for the crucial 5 minutes of darkness. He assembled the guests informally in the morning room, where sunlight struggled through the clouds to illuminate the faded chintz and family portraits. One by one, he asked them to recount their exact movements from the moment the lights failed until they returned. Lady Evelyn spoke first. "I was standing near the fireplace talking to Mildred. When the lights went out, I cried out. I confess I was startled and grasped her arm. We stayed together until the lights came back." Mrs. Harrington confirmed this with a nervous nod. "Yes, Evelyn clutched me quite hard. I could feel her rings." Colonel Harrington declared he had been by the window, looking out at the storm clouds. "Felt someone brush past me. Man, I think, but can't swear to it in the dark." Clarissa laughed. "I was sitting on the sofa smoking. I stayed put. Didn't fancy barging about in the blackout like a blindfolded donkey." Geoffrey Farrar said, "Victor and I were over by the gramophone. We'd just put on a record. Some jazz thing. When the lights went, we stood still and cursed the fuses." Victor Leland agreed. "Exactly so. I remember Geoffrey saying, 'Damned inconvenient.' We did not move until light returned." Raoul Vavasour had been nearer the door. "I was speaking with Miss Clements about French novels. The darkness came. I remained where I was. One does not stumble about in strange houses." Miss Clements corroborated quietly. "Yes, Monsieur Vavasour was beside me. I recognized his voice when he asked if I was all right." Poirot thanked them and dismissed the group with a polite murmur. Yet his eyes were thoughtful. Every alibi appeared solid, each person vouched for by at least one other, and yet, he sought out the butler, Graves, and asked to be shown the main electrical switch in the cellar. It was housed in a small cupboard off the kitchen corridor, secured by a simple Yale lock. "Anyone could have reached it?" Poirot asked. "In theory, sir, but the cellar door creaks loudly, and the kitchen was occupied by cook and the maids until 11:30. After that, the servants retired to their quarters upstairs. The back stairs lead directly past the cellar door." Poirot nodded and went outside to examine the grounds beneath the library window. The flower bed he had noticed yesterday was now trampled by policemen's boots, but he could still see the round indentation. He knelt, measuring it with a pocket rule, exactly 1 inch in diameter. "A walking stick, perhaps," murmured Inspector Jarvis, who had joined him. "Or an umbrella for rule," said Poirot. "Observe, the earth is pressed, not dug. Something was rested here, not thrust in." They looked up at the library window, 12 feet above. No ladder marks, no scraped ivy. "Could have been thrown out," Jarvis suggested. "Possible," Poirot conceded. "But the window was bolted inside when we entered. Someone would have had to close and bolt it again." They moved to the gravel path that ran around the house. Here Poirot found what he sought. A single clear footprint in a patch of soft earth where rain had collected overnight. It was the print of a man's shoe, narrow, elegant, with a distinctive worn patch on the outer edge of the sole. "Size 9, I think," said Jarvis. "Not the Colonel's. He takes 11s, nor Mr. Farrar's. his are broader. Poirot photographed it mentally. We shall compare with the gentleman's shoes later. As they returned indoors, a constable reported that heavy rain had begun again, washing away any further traces in the garden. Poirot clicked his tongue in annoyance. Evidence was vanishing as quickly as it appeared. In the afternoon he interviewed the servants. Most had impeccable alibis, together in their sitting room, playing cards. Only the missing temporary footman James remained unaccounted for. The agency in Exeter, when telephoned, professed astonishment. They had never sent anyone named James to Harrington Hall. "A false footman," said Jarvis grimly. "That settles it. Outside gang." Poirot was not convinced. He retired to the library and sat in a deep armchair, eyes half closed, fingers steepled. "Let us consider the facts," he told himself. The blackout lasted 5 minutes exactly, timed by the butler's watch. Someone threw the main switch, knowing precisely how long it would take to restore power. Someone else, or the same person, opened the safe, removed the brooch, and left the room. All while the household was in confusion. Yet the library door had been closed when they entered after the lights returned. Lady Evelyn had tried it first and found it locked. The key was still on her chain upstairs. Poirot rose and examined the door. It was heavy oak, with a mortice lock. He tested the handle, firm. Then he noticed something, a faint scratch on the paintwork near the keyhole, as though a tool had slipped. He called Graves. "This door, was it locked last night before the theft?" "No, sir. Lady Evelyn had been in here earlier, admiring the brooch. She left it unlocked when she went up to dress for dinner. So anyone could have entered later." "Yes, sir." Poirot returned to the safe. He opened it. The combination had been left unchanged, and studied the interior. On the velvet tray where the brooch had rested lay a single strand of dark hair. He picked it up delicately with tweezers and placed it in an envelope. Then he went in search of Victor Leland. The art dealer was in the billiard room, idly potting balls. He straightened as Poirot entered. "May I see your shoes, monsieur?" Leland looked surprised but complied, lifting one foot. The soles were new, unscuffed. "And your walking stick? I do not use one." Poirot thanked him and moved on to Raoul Vavasour, whom he found in the drawing-room reading a newspaper. Vavasour's shoes were highly polished, size 9, with a slight wear on the outer edge. "Interesting," said Poirot softly. "You were near the door during the blackout, monsieur. It would have been easy for you to slip out, descend to the cellar, throw the switch, return upstairs, enter the library, the door being unlocked, open the safe." Vavasour smiled urbanely. "All theoretically possible, monsieur. But why should I? I have no need of money. And the brooch is a family piece. I could never sell it without questions. Unless you intended to return it later for a price." Vavasour's smile did not waver. "A pretty theory. But Miss Clements will tell you I never left her side." Poirot bowed and withdrew. Next he sought Clarissa Harrington. She was in the conservatory, moodily clipping dead leaves from a geranium. "Your shoes, mademoiselle." She kicked off a patent leather pump. "Size 5. Not the footprint." "And you remained on the sofa?" "Absolutely. Ask anyone." But when Poirot questioned the others again, a small discrepancy emerged. Mrs. Harrington now recalled that Clarissa had stood up during the blackout. "I heard her say something about finding matches." Clarissa, confronted, shrugged. "I may have moved a step or two." but I didn't leave the room. A tiny crack in the perfect alibi. Poirot then discovered something more significant. In the wastepaper basket of Geoffrey Ferrar's bedroom, the police had found a crumpled invitation, not to this house party, but to a London firm of jewellers, asking Mr. Ferrar to bring any valuables he wished valued. The date was next week. Geoffrey, questioned, admitted he had considered selling some minor pieces, but denied any involvement with the brooch. By evening, alibis were fraying at the edges. The Colonel now thought he might have moved toward the door. Leland admitted he and Geoffrey had separated briefly in the darkness. Even Miss Clements confessed she had turned away from Vavasour for a moment to help Lady Evelyn. Only one thing remained certain. Someone in that drawing room, or very close to it, had engineered the theft. As Poirot stood at his bedroom window, watching rain lash the glass, Inspector Jarvis knocked. "We've found something, sir. In the old ice house, a man's glove, left-handed, and a small electric torch." Poirot examined them. The glove was fine leather, faintly scented with a distinctive cologne, lavender and bergamot. "I know that scent," he said quietly. "It is worn by one of our guests." The net was tightening. But the rain continued to fall, washing away footprints, obliterating traces. And somewhere in Harrington Hall, the thief was waiting, perhaps planning the next move. Hercule Poirot closed the window and turned back to the room. The little grey cells were busy. Soon, very soon, the pattern would emerge. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Library. The rain had ceased by late afternoon, leaving the air washed clean and the gardens dripping. A weak sun struggled through the clouds, casting long shadows across the lawns of Harrington Hall. Inside the house, tension hung as heavy as the damp outside. Inspector Jarvis and his men continued their methodical search, tapping walls, lifting carpets, and questioning servants for the third time. No trace of the emerald brooch had yet appeared. Hercule Poirot, however, preferred subtler methods. He suggested to Lady Evelyn that tea be served in the library, the very scene of the crime. "It will encourage the memories, madame," he explained with a twinkle. "People speak more freely when surrounded by familiar things." Lady Evelyn, pale but composed, agreed. At 4 o'clock the party assembled. Colonel and Mrs. Harrington, Clarissa, Geoffrey Ferrar, and Victor Leland together as usual, Raoul Vavasour, Miss Clements, and Poirot himself. A footman brought in a silver tray laden with scones, cakes, and a large Worcester teapot. Conversation began stiffly, circling the weather and the excellence of the Darjeeling. Poirot waited until cups were filled and plates handed round before he spoke. "It is regrettable," he began mildly, "that so beautiful a jewel should vanish in so melodramatic a fashion. One thinks almost of the stories of Mr. Edgar Allan Poe. The crime committed in full view, yet invisible." Colonel Harrington snorted. "Poe? Nonsense! This is a straightforward theft by a professional gang." "Yet the professionals, mon colonel, leave usually some trace, a jemmy mark, a cut window pane, a ladder forgotten. Here we have nothing. Only darkness, 5 minutes of confusion, and an open safe." Victor Leland set down his cup with a faint clatter. "The safe was modern, a chub, I believe. Not easily forced." "Precisely," said Poirot. "And the combination known only to Lady Evelyn. The door showed no marks of violence. It was opened by someone who knew the numbers, or who watched them being dialed." A small silence fell. Lady Evelyn coloured slightly. "I am careful, monsieur. I always shield the dial with my hand. Yet human nature is observant, Poirot continued. A reflection in a mirror, a shadow on the wall, many ways exist. Raoul Vavasour leaned forward, his dark eyes interested. You suggest, then, that the thief is one of us? I suggest nothing, monsieur. I state only facts. The house was secure. No outsider entered or left. Therefore... Geoffrey Farrar laughed uneasily. Good Lord, Poirot, you'll have us all suspecting each other next. Pass the scones. Clarissa? Clarissa obliged, but her eyes were bright with malicious amusement. It is rather fun, though. Like a detective novel. Who do you think did it, Monsieur Poirot? Uncle? Or perhaps Diana? She's quiet enough to be dangerous. Miss Clements flushed. Really, Clarissa? Poirot raised a hand pacifically. Let us not accuse. Let us instead consider motive. The brooch is worth £30,000, perhaps more. Who among us has need of money? The Colonel glared. Damned cheek. Geoffrey's smile was brittle. We all have need of money these days, old boy. Except perhaps Vavasour here. He looks prosperous enough. Vavasour inclined his head. I'm comfortable, yes, but comfort is relative. Poirot turned to Lady Evelyn. Madam, you spoke yesterday of a will. The brooch is entailed. Yes, it passes to Clarissa on my death, or on her marriage, if she reaches 30 without issue. My husband's will was quite specific. Clarissa shrugged. So, I'm the ultimate heiress. But I didn't steal it, if that's what you're thinking. I'd much rather wear it than have it locked in a safe. Mrs. Harrington murmured something about the curse again, but no one paid attention. Poirot sipped his tea thoughtfully. He had arranged the chairs in a loose circle, with himself near the fireplace. Now he rose and strolled to the bookshelves, apparently examining the leather-bound volumes. An admirable collection, he remarked. Many first editions, and here, he pulled out a heavy tome. A history of the Harrington family, privately printed, most interesting. He opened it at random and read aloud. In 1889, the brooch was worn by Lady Amelia Harrington at the Devonshire ball, where it excited much admiration. Shortly afterwards, her brother Captain Edward Harrington disappeared in mysterious circumstances in South America, taking with him certain family papers. Lady Evelyn started. I had forgotten that story. Edward was believed to have embezzled regimental funds. He was never heard of again. Yet family stories persist, Poirot said softly. Perhaps he did not die. Perhaps descendants exist who believe they have a claim. All eyes turned involuntarily to Raoul Vavasour, the only new relation. Vavasour met the looks with calm amusement. My branch of the family remained in France, monsieur. We have no pretensions to English heirlooms. Poirot replaced the book and moved to another shelf. His fingers paused on a row of modern novels, then drew out a slim volume, bound in green leather. He opened it casually and paused. Between the pages lay a folded sheet of paper. He unfolded it with deliberate care. It was a single sheet of cheap typing paper, the message brief and typed. The emerald belongs to the true heir. Return it or face justice. The same typewriter as the anonymous warnings Lady Evelyn had received. A murmur ran round the room. Good God, muttered the Colonel. The scoundrel's been in here again. Poirot examined the paper closely. Placed recently, I think, the book shows no dust on these pages. He turned to Miss Clements. Mademoiselle, you are familiar with the library. Who has been in here today? Miss Clements hesitated. Several people. Mr. Leland was looking at the art books this morning. Mr. Vavasour borrowed a newspaper. Clarissa came in for a book of poetry, I believe. Clarissa nodded. Guilty. But I didn't leave threatening notes. Victor Leland looked uncomfortable. I was only here a few minutes. Poirot's gaze rested on him thoughtfully. The art dealer's hands were never still. Today they twisted a handkerchief into knots. At that moment the door opened, and Inspector Jarvis entered, raindrops still on his coat. "Beg pardon, ladies and gentlemen. We've found something in the summer house, a small crowbar hidden under a flower pot. Looks like it was used to pry open a drawer or some such." The Colonel exploded. "There you are, outside gang after all." But Poirot was watching faces. Victor Leland had gone very pale. Raoul Vavasour's expression was unreadable. Geoffrey Farrar lit a cigarette with fingers that trembled slightly. Tea concluded soon after in an atmosphere of constraint. The guests dispersed, some to their rooms, others to the drawing-room. Poirot lingered in the library with Lady Evelyn and Inspector Jarvis. "The note is interesting," Poirot said. "It speaks of a true heir. Yet the brooch is not part of the entailed estate. Only the custom is that it passes to the eldest female. Legally, Lady Evelyn could bequeath it to anyone." Lady Evelyn looked troubled. "There was an old quarrel, years ago. My husband's cousin, another Edward, claimed the brooch should have gone to his mother, but the will was clear. And this cousin died in the war, but he had a son who went to Australia, I believe." Jarvis grunted. "We'll check passenger lists." As evening approached, Poirot took a solitary walk in the gardens. The air was cold and fresh. Rooks wheeled above the elms. He paused by the library window, noting again the flower bed and the round indentation now half filled with rainwater. Then he heard voices, low, urgent, from the terrace above. He stepped into the shadow of a yew hedge. It was Geoffrey Farrar and Victor Leland. "Can't go on like this," Geoffrey was saying. "If Poirot keeps digging—" "Keep your nerve," Leland hissed. "No one suspects us, yet, but we must get it out of the house soon. The summer house? Too risky now. Wait until tomorrow night. The tradesman's van—" The voices faded as they moved away. Poirot remained motionless for a long moment. So, a conspiracy. Farrar and Leland working together. The motive clear. Geoffrey's debts. Leland's knowledge of the jewel's value. But how had they opened the safe? And the note about the true heir? A blind? He returned indoors deep in thought. In the hall, he encountered Raoul Vavasour descending the stairs, a book under his arm. "Ah, monsieur," Vavasour said pleasantly. "You look grave. Progress. Always progress, monsieur. Tell me, you wear a cologne of lavender and bergamot, no?" Vavasour smiled. "A family habit. My father blended it himself." The glove found in the ice-house carried the same scent. For the first time, Vavasour's composure flickered. Indeed? How unfortunate! But many men use similar scents. Perhaps. Yet combined with the footprint of a size 9 shoe with wear on the outer edge. Vavasour bowed slightly. "You are thorough, monsieur. I admire it." He passed on, leaving Poirot staring after him. That night, as the house settled into quiet, Poirot sat in his room with the lights low. On the table before him lay the evidence he had gathered. The typed note, the strand of dark hair from the safe, the description of the glove, the measurements of the footprint. Piece by piece the puzzle was forming. But one vital fragment was still missing, the method by which the thief had left the library and relocked the door from outside. Poirot twirled his moustaches and smiled into the firelight. Tomorrow, he promised himself, The little grey cells would supply the answer. Outside, the wind rose again, whispering through the ancient trees like secrets too long buried. Chapter 5. The Midnight Intruder. The house party at Harrington Hall had become a siege. Dinner that evening was eaten almost in silence. The clink of silver against china, the loudest sound in the panelled dining room. No one lingered afterwards. Excuses were made early, and by 10 o'clock most of the guests had retired. Hercule Poirot, however, had no intention of sleeping. He sat in his bedroom with the lights dimmed, a small notebook open on the table beside him. On its pages he had listed every fact, every discrepancy, every fleeting expression he had observed over the past 2 days. The little grey cells, he told himself, were close to the solution. Only one more piece was needed. At 11:30 he extinguished his lamp, opened his door a crack, and listened. The corridor was silent. He slipped out, soft-soled shoes making no sound on the thick carpet, and descended the back stairs to the ground floor. The library door was closed but not locked. He entered, leaving it ajar, and positioned himself in the deep shadow behind a tall globe stand. From here he could see both the safe and the French windows that opened onto the terrace. He settled down to wait. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 12, then 1:30, then 1. The house creaked occasionally as old timbers cooled, but otherwise all was still. At 20 minutes past 1, Poirot's patience was rewarded. A faint click sounded from the direction of the French windows. One of them opened inward very slowly, admitting a breath of cold night air. A figure slipped through, tall, cloaked in dark clothing, face obscured by a soft hat pulled low. Moonlight caught the glint of something metallic in the intruder's gloved hand. The figure moved with confidence toward the safe, knelt, and began working on the combination dial. The movements were quick, practiced. Poirot waited until the dial had been spun several times, then stepped forward silently and switched on the electric torch he carried. "Bonsoir, monsieur," he said pleasantly. "You are somewhat late for your appointment." The intruder sprang up with a muffled exclamation and whirled round. The torch beam illuminated the face for an instant. Pale, startled, unmistakably that of Raoul Vavasour. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Vavasour recovered his poise and gave a small, rueful smile. "Congratulations, Monsieur Poirot. I underestimated you." "You did indeed," Poirot replied, keeping the torch steady. "And now, if you please, we will return whatever you have come to fetch." Vavasour's hand moved toward his pocket, but Poirot's voice sharpened. "I would not advise it. I am armed, and the house is no longer asleep." As if to confirm his words, footsteps sounded in the corridor. Inspector Jarvis appeared in the doorway, revolver in hand, followed by 2 constables. "Very neatly done, Mr. Poirot," Jarvis said with grudging admiration. "We've been watching the terrace since midnight, as you suggested." Vavasour shrugged elegantly and raised both hands. "It appears the game is up." He was searched. In an inner pocket, the police found a small leather pouch containing professional safe-cracking tools, but no brooch. "Where is it?" Jarvis demanded. Vavasour smiled. "You may search me again, Inspector. I came only to retrieve something I believed had been left behind." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You refer, perhaps, to the glove discovered in the ice house? Or the torch?" "Perhaps." Jarvis ordered the constables to take Vavasour to the morning room for questioning. Poirot followed, deep in thought. Under the bright lights of the morning room, Raoul Vavasour preserved his urbanity. He admitted freely to entering the library that night, but denied any part in the original theft. "I received information," he said calmly, "that the brooch might be hidden somewhere on the estate. I came to recover it for Lady Evelyn, and I confess for the substantial reward that would surely follow." "From whom did this information come?" Jarvis asked, "that I am not at liberty to reveal." Poirot intervened. "Monsieur, you wear a distinctive cologne. The glove found yesterday carried the same scent. Your shoes match the footprint beneath the library window. And tonight you attempted to open the safe with professional tools. These are not the actions of an innocent man." Vavasour inclined his head. "I concede the glove is mine. I lost it during a walk yesterday. The footprint, coincidence. As for tonight, I believed the brooch might have been returned to the safe by the real thief in order to cast suspicion elsewhere. A common device." Jarvis snorted. "We'll see what a night in the cells does for your memory." But when Vavasour was removed, Poirot remained dissatisfied. Something about the Frenchman's demeanour rang false. Too composed, too ready to accept capture. He returned to the library with Jarvis and examined the safe once more. The dial showed faint new scratches where Vavasour's tools had worked. "He knew the combination," Jarvis muttered, "or was very close to discovering it." Poirot shook his head. "No, mon ami. He was pretending to work the dial. Observe, the scratches are superficial. He had no intention of opening the safe tonight. He wished to be caught." Jarvis stared. "Why on earth? To establish that he is a thief. Yes, but not the thief of the emerald brooch. By allowing himself to be discovered in this relatively minor trespass, he diverts suspicion from his real role in the greater crime." "Then he was involved in the original theft?" "Almost certainly, but not alone." They searched the grounds at dawn, concentrating on the area near the ice house where the glove had been found. In a hollow beneath a rhododendron bush, they discovered a small tin box buried shallowly in the earth. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, lay a single large emerald, but not the Harrington stone. It was smaller, of inferior colour. "A substitute," Poirot murmured, "prepared in advance, perhaps, for a switch that was never completed." Back in the house, the discovery of the midnight intruder had shattered the remaining calm. Breakfast was chaotic. Clarissa was openly excited, Mrs. Harrington tearful, the Colonel apoplectic with rage at that damned French bounder. Geoffrey Farrar and Victor Leland kept to themselves, speaking in low voices. Poirot watched them closely. Leland's face was drawn. Farrar's eyes darted nervously. Lady Evelyn summoned Poirot to her private sitting room. "Is it over, monsieur? Have we caught the thief?" "Not yet, madame. Monsieur Vavasour is a clever man, but he is not the brain behind this affair. He plays a subordinate role. The executor, perhaps, but not the planner." "Then who?" "That I shall reveal very soon. But first, there is a small experiment I wish to conduct." He asked her to assemble everyone in the drawing-room at noon, including Vavasour, under police guard. She agreed, though her hands trembled. At noon the party gathered. Vavasour sat between two constables, impeccably dressed and apparently unconcerned. The others avoided his gaze. Poirot stood before the fireplace. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "we have reached a critical point. Last night a man entered the library, intending to open the safe. He was caught. He claims innocence of the greater crime. Yet certain facts link him to it: the glove, the scent, the footprint." Vavasour smiled faintly. "But," Poirot continued, "there is another link. one that points not to Monsieur Vavasour alone, but to a wartime betrayal. He paused, letting the words sink in. During the Great War, a certain officer in French intelligence was suspected of passing information to the enemy. He disappeared before he could be arrested. His name was Captain Raoul de Vavasour, father to our guest here. The scandal was hushed up to avoid embarrassment to an allied nation. Vavasour's composure cracked for the first time. That is a lie. No, monsieur, it is documented in the French archives, and the son has lived under that shadow ever since. Perhaps he seeks to restore family fortunes by acquiring a famous jewel, one that could be broken up and sold without trace. Lady Evelyn gasped. But how could he know the combination to the safe? He did not, Poirot said quietly. No one needed the combination. The safe was opened by the simplest of methods, one that required no force, no skill. He turned to the group. The thief entered the library before dinner, when the door was unlocked. He, or she, opened the safe then, using the combination observed earlier, removed the brooch, and left the door closed, but not fully latched. Later, during the blackout, an accomplice merely pushed the door open, stepped inside, and retrieved the brooch from where it had been temporarily hidden, perhaps in a drawer or behind books. The safe door was left open to create confusion. A murmur ran round the room. "But the key," Lady Evelyn began. "The key was irrelevant. The safe was already open when the lights failed." Victor Leland rose suddenly. "This is all conjecture. You have no proof." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "On the contrary, monsieur. The strand of dark hair found in the safe. It matches yours, does it not? And the overheard conversation yesterday on the terrace, planning to remove it from the house in the tradesman's van tomorrow." Geoffrey Farrar went white. "You spied on us." "I heard what was necessary. You, Monsieur Farrar, needed money desperately. You, Monsieur Leland, knew the jewel's value and had contacts to dispose of it. You recruited Monsieur Vavasour for his skills, and perhaps to take the blame if necessary." Vavasour laughed softly. "A pretty story, but where is the brooch?" Poirot smiled. "That, mon ami, is the final question, and I believe I know the answer." He turned to Inspector Jarvis. "Have your men searched the chimney in Mr. Leland's bedroom? I think we shall find it there, wrapped in asbestos cloth to protect it from heat." Leland made a sudden dash for the door, but the constables were too quick. As he was restrained, his face twisted with fury and defeat. The brooch was recovered 20 minutes later, exactly where Poirot had predicted. But the case, as Poirot well knew, was not yet closed. One final revelation remained, the identity of the true mastermind who had tied all these threads together. And that, he promised himself, would come before another night fell on Harrington Hall. Chapter 6. Twists of Fate. The recovery of the emerald brooch from Victor Leland's chimney should have ended the affair. By rights, the house should have exhaled in relief, toasts should have been drunk, and trains booked for London. Instead, Harrington Hall seemed to hold its breath tighter than ever. Inspector Jarvis, triumphant at first, had taken statements from Leland, Farrar, and Vavasour until the small hours. All three men now sat in separate rooms under police guard, each telling a slightly different story. Leland blamed Farrar for the entire plan. Farrar insisted Leland had tempted him with promises of debt clearance. Vavasour maintained he had been hired merely to advise on the jewel's disposal abroad and had never touched the brooch himself. Poirot, however, was not satisfied. He breakfasted alone in the dining room at 9, eating a single boiled egg with mathematical precision while turning the facts over in his mind. Something was wrong, a discord, a false note in the harmony he sought. When Lady Evelyn joined him, pale and heavy-eyed, he greeted her with grave courtesy. "Madame, the brooch is returned to you, yet I confess the case is not yet closed to my satisfaction." She sank into a chair. "Not closed, but you found it exactly where you predicted. 3 men have confessed to conspiracy." "Confessed, yes, but to what precisely? They have admitted a plan to steal and sell the brooch, yet the details do not fit. The anonymous letters, the talk of a true heir, the typed note in the library book, these are not the work of desperate gamblers and greedy dealers. They speak of a deeper motive, a personal vendetta." Lady Evelyn frowned. "Then who? That is what I intend to discover today." Poirot spent the morning in the library with Inspector Jarvis, examining the recovered brooch under a strong magnifying glass. The great emerald gleamed magnificently, surrounded by its circle of diamonds. Yet something caught Poirot's attention. A tiny scratch on the gold setting, almost invisible, on the reverse side. "Curious," he murmured. "This mark is recent. Made, perhaps, when the brooch was removed from its case." Jarvis shrugged. "Easily done in haste. Perhaps. Yet observe, the scratch runs across one of the diamond collets. A thief in haste would not risk damaging a stone." He set the brooch down and asked to see the leather pouch of tools taken from Vavasour the previous night. Among them was a slim steel probe, its tip faintly scored. "See how the scoring matches the scratch," Poirot said quietly. "Monsieur Vavasour did indeed handle the brooch, but not to steal it." Jarvis stared. Then what the devil was he doing? "Examining it, perhaps to confirm it was genuine." The inspector threw up his hands. "I give up. You'll be telling me next that the brooch we found in the chimney is a fake." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "That, mon ami, is precisely what I begin to suspect." They took the brooch to the terrace where the light was stronger. Poirot held it up to the sun, turning it slowly. Then he produced from his pocket the small, inferior emerald discovered buried near the ice house. "Compare the 2 stones," he said. Jarvis looked from one to the other. The buried one's smaller, poorer colour. No comparison. Exactly. Yet if one were to remove the great emerald from its setting and replace it with this inferior stone, then hide the true gem elsewhere, who would suspect? The brooch would still look magnificent at a glance. Lady Evelyn, summoned to the terrace, went white. "You mean the brooch we have now is not the real one?" "I fear so, madame. The stone now in the setting is the inferior emerald, cleverly mounted in place of the original. The scratch we see was made when the true stone was prized out." "But then where is the real emerald? That is the question." Jarvis swore under his breath. "Leland switched them. But why hide a fake in his chimney?" "Because he believed it to be genuine. The substitution was made earlier, before the theft." Poirot turned to Lady Evelyn. "Madam, when exactly did you last examine the brooch closely? Under good light, turning it over?" She thought for a moment. "When the guards brought it from the bank on Friday afternoon. I opened the case in this very library, held it up, admired it. I am certain it was the true stone then. And after that, I placed it in the safe myself and locked the door. No one else touched it until it was gone." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "No one? You are sure?" "Well, Victor Leland was in the room at the time. He asked to see it again. He had appraised it once before, you remember." I allowed him a brief look. He held it for perhaps a minute, complimented me, and handed it back. Poirot and Jarvis exchanged glances. Then that was the moment, Poirot said softly. Monsieur Leland, with his knowledge of jewels and his nimble fingers, switched the stones then and there, in full view, relying on the confidence trick that no one would suspect such audacity in broad daylight. The inferior emerald, prepared in advance, was mounted in an identical setting. The true stone went into his pocket. But the safe was locked, Jarvis objected. Precisely. The brooch placed in the safe was already the substitute. The elaborate theft that night, the blackout, the open safe, the confusion, was theatre. Its purpose was to cover the fact that the real emerald had been stolen hours earlier, and to provide a plausible story for its disappearance. Lady Evelyn pressed a hand to her throat. Then the entire weekend, the fear, the police, the arrests, all staged. Staged, yes, by Monsieur Leland, with the assistance of Farrar and Vavasour. They planned to let suspicion fall on an outside gang, or on Vavasour as the false footman. Meanwhile, the true emerald would be smuggled out, perhaps in the tradesman's van, as I overheard them discuss, and sold abroad. Jarvis was already moving. I'll have Leland brought here at once. Victor Leland entered the library 10 minutes later, flanked by constables. His face was grey, his usual assurance gone. Poirot held up the brooch. Monsieur, you are a skilled practitioner, but you overlooked one detail, the weight. A Colombian emerald of this size is distinctly heavier than the inferior stone you substituted. Had anyone held both, as I have now, the difference would be apparent. Leland attempted a smile. I've no idea what you mean. Then permit me to demonstrate. Poirot produced a small pocket scale he had borrowed from the kitchen. He weighed the brooch carefully, noted the figure, then removed the central stone with a jeweller's tool he had requested from the village. The empty setting and the inferior emerald weighed significantly less than expected. Leland's shoulders sagged. Where's the true stone? Jarvis demanded. Leland hesitated, then shrugged. In the heel of my left shoe. I hollowed it out yesterday. The constables removed his shoe. Concealed in a neatly crafted cavity in the heel was the magnificent Harrington emerald wrapped in cotton wool. Lady Evelyn gave a cry of relief as Poirot held it up to the light. The true stone blazed with deep green fire. But why the elaborate charade? She asked. Leland spoke bitterly. Because a simple substitution would have pointed directly to me, the only person who handled the brooch after it left the bank. By staging a dramatic theft, we hoped suspicion would scatter among servants, guests, even family. Geoffrey needed money urgently. Vavasour wanted a share for his silence. It should have worked. Yet you reckoned without Hercule Poirot? Poirot said quietly. As Leland was led away, Poirot turned to Lady Evelyn with the recovered emerald in his palm. Here is your treasure restored, madame. But I fear the affair is not quite finished. One thread remains, the anonymous letters mentioning a true heir. Those were not written by Leland or his accomplices. They served another purpose altogether. Lady Evelyn looked puzzled. Another purpose? Yes, to frighten you into displaying the brooch, to bring it from the bank where it was safe. Someone wished it to be here, in this house, for reasons unconnected with mere theft. Who? Poirot's eyes rested on her thoughtfully. That, madame, we shall discover this evening. I have arranged a small reconstruction. All the guests will assemble in the drawing-room at 9 o'clock. The truth, I promise you, will then be revealed. He bowed and left her staring at the emerald in his hand, its beauty suddenly ominous. Outside in the corridor, Inspector Jarvis caught up with him. "You're sure of this, Poirot? We have the jewel and the thieves. I am sure of nothing except that perfect symmetry is required. At present, the pattern is incomplete. Tonight, it will be finished." The day passed in uneasy quiet. The arrested men were removed to the Exeter jail. The remaining guests, Colonel and Mrs. Harrington, Clarissa, Miss Clements, kept to their rooms. Rain began again in the late afternoon, drumming on the windows like impatient fingers. At 9 o'clock the drawing-room was dimly lit, the fire burning low. The survivors of the house party assembled as requested: Lady Evelyn, the Colonel and his wife and daughter, Miss Clements. Inspector Jarvis stood by the door. Poirot entered last, carrying a small leather case. He placed it on a table and faced the room. "Mesdames et messieurs, we have recovered the emerald. We have unmasked a conspiracy. Yet one question remains. Who sent the anonymous letters that caused the brooch to be brought here in the first place? Who benefited from the fear and confusion?" He opened the case and took out the typed notes and the fragment found in the garden. These were typed on a portable machine. A Corona, I believe. The letter E is slightly misaligned. Such a machine exists in this house, in the secretary's office used by Miss Clements. All eyes turned to Diana Clements. The quiet young woman had gone very pale. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, "it was you who typed the warnings." She made no denial. After a long moment, she nodded. "Yes, I wrote them." A gasp escaped Mrs. Harrington. "But why, Diana?" Lady Evelyn asked, bewildered. Miss Clements raised her head. Her voice was steady though low. "Because the brooch should never have come to you, Evelyn. It belonged, by rights, to my mother." She reached into her pocket and drew out a folded document. "This is a copy of a codicil to your late husband's will, suppressed 20 years ago. It left the brooch to his cousin Edward's wife, my mother, in recognition of a debt of honour. The original was destroyed, but my mother kept this copy. When I came here as your secretary, I hoped one day to reclaim what was ours." Lady Evelyn stared at her. "Diana, I had no idea. If this is true, why not tell me openly?" "Because you would not have believed me, or the family would have fought it. I thought if I could frighten you into displaying the brooch, then arrange for it to disappear, I could later produce the codicil and claim it had been stolen by someone ignorant of its true ownership." Poirot nodded slowly. "And the note in the library book, placed there to be found?" "Yes, to strengthen the idea of an outside claimant." "But you did not reckon with Monsieur Llewellyn's greed," Poirot said. "He saw an opportunity and seized it. Your plan to create mystery gave him the perfect cover for his substitution." Miss Clements bowed her head. "I realized too late what was happening. By then I could only watch in silence." Lady Evelyn rose and crossed to her secretary. After a moment, she took the woman's hand. "Diana, if this codicil is genuine, the brooch should go to you. I shall consult my solicitors at once. There has been enough deceit and pain." Miss Clements looked up, tears in her eyes. "You would do that?" "I would. The curse, if curse there is, comes from holding what is not rightfully ours." The room was silent. Outside the rain had stopped. A faint moon silvered the wet gardens. Poirot closed his leather case with a snap. "And so," he said quietly, "the twists of fate are resolved. Greed, desperation, and an old injustice all played their part. But justice, mes amis, has the final word." He bowed to the company and left the room, his small figure precise against the flickering firelight. In the hall he paused, looking back once at the drawing-room door. The case was nearly complete. One last revelation awaited, but that could wait until morning. For tonight, Hercule Poirot was content. Chapter 7. The Emerald's Secret. The morning of the third day after the theft broke clear and frosty. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of the drawing-room at Harrington Hall, striking sparks from the great emerald that now lay on a velvet cushion in the centre of the mahogany table. The brooch had been reassembled by a jeweller, summoned urgently from Exeter. The true stone was back in its antique setting, blazing with imperious beauty. All the remaining occupants of the house were assembled. Lady Evelyn at the head of the table, Colonel and Mrs. Harrington on her right, Clarissa lounging with calculated indifference, Miss Diana Clements pale but composed. Inspector Jarvis stood by the door, notebook in hand. Hercule Poirot occupied the chair opposite Lady Evelyn, his small hands folded, his eyes brighter than the jewel itself. "My friends," he began quietly, "the emerald is restored. 3 men sit in custody for their attempt to steal it. Miss Clements has revealed an old family injustice that will, I trust, be righted honourably. Yet one secret remains, the deepest secret of the Harrington emerald brooch. It is time to lay it bare." He rose and lifted the cushion, bringing the brooch closer to the light. "You see a magnificent jewel, but observe the setting more carefully." He turned the brooch over. On the reverse, hidden beneath an ornate gold scroll, was a small catch, almost invisible unless one knew where to look. Poirot pressed it delicately. A tiny compartment sprang open in the back of the setting, no larger than a thumbnail. From it he drew a folded fragment of aged paper, brittle and yellowed. A collective intake of breath sounded round the room. "What is it?" Lady Evelyn whispered. "A secret entrusted to the brooch more than a century ago," Poirot replied. "Read it, madame, if you please." With trembling fingers she unfolded the paper. The writing was faded, but legible, in English, with a date, 1798. "To whichever of my descendants shall find this, the emerald you wear was purchased not with gold, but with blood and silence. In the year 1782, in the palace of the Maharaja of Jhansi, Sir Reginald Harrington was shown a map to a hidden treasury of the Maratha princes, jewels and gold concealed when the Mughals threatened. In return for guiding British troops to a secret pass, Sir Reginald received the Great Emerald and a copy of the map. The original he returned to the Maharaja. My copy I have divided into 4 parts. This fragment shows only the approach through the Western Ghats. The other 3 are hidden elsewhere. Should India ever be free, and the treasure sought for the good of its people, let the pieces be united. Until then, guard the secret well. Edward Harrington, his grandson, fearful of the curse that has already claimed 2 lives." Lady Evelyn looked up, stunned. "A treasure map, hidden in the brooch all these years?" "Precisely," said Poirot. "The so-called curse was nothing supernatural, merely the danger that surrounds great wealth. Men have died trying to force the secret from its keepers. Sir Reginald's son was murdered in India. Another descendant vanished in South America, seeking the treasure alone. The family learned to keep silence, but the legend persisted." Colonel Harrington cleared his throat. "Then the anonymous letters, the talk of a true heir, were designed to bring the brooch into the open," Poirot finished, "so that the compartment could be discovered and the fragment removed. Miss Clements acted from a sense of justice, believing the jewel itself rightfully hers. But there was another who knew the full legend, and coveted not the emerald, but what it concealed. All eyes turned instinctively toward the door, but Poirot raised a hand. No, mes amis, the architect of this affair is here among us. He turned to Clarissa Harrington. Mademoiselle, you have played your part admirably, the bored young modern, amused by the drama, detached from the fuss. Yet it was you who knew the family archives best. You who spent hours in the muniment room cataloguing old papers for your father. You who found Edward Harrington's private journal describing the hiding place in the brooch. Clarissa's languid pose stiffened. This is absurd. Is it? You needed money, not for gambling, but for a life beyond this provincial estate. You dreamed of travel, excitement, perhaps even of finding the Maratha treasure yourself. When Miss Clements began sending anonymous warnings you yourself encouraged her to send by dropping hints about the suppressed codicil, you saw the perfect opportunity. Clarissa laughed, but it rang hollow. You have no proof. On the contrary, Poirot said gently. The typed notes were written on the portable machine in the secretary's office, yes, but the misalignment of the E was deliberately created by striking the key repeatedly with a pin. A clever touch to cast suspicion on Miss Clements. The fragment of typed paper I found in the garden. You dropped it there for me to discover, knowing I would link it to the warnings. He reached into his pocket and produced another small item, a gold signet ring engraved with the Harrington crest. This was found yesterday in the lining of your jewel case, mademoiselle. It belongs to Monsieur Vavasour. You took it from his room to plant in the grounds, strengthening the case against him as the midnight intruder. Clarissa's face had gone very white. You can't prove I intended to steal the map. Perhaps not in a court of law, Poirot admitted, but consider, you encouraged Mr. Leland's interest in the brooch by suggesting he might buy it privately if your aunt ever tired of it. You knew he would seize any chance to acquire it illegally. When he proposed the substitution plan to your Uncle Geoffrey, you did not discourage it, for in the confusion, you intended to open the compartment and remove the fragment. Lady Evelyn stared at her niece. Clarissa, is this true? The girl's defiance crumbled. She buried her face in her hands. I only wanted the map, she whispered, not the emerald. The treasure, if it exists, could be worth millions. I was going to find it, make something of my life. Colonel Harrington rose heavily. My own daughter, God help me. Poirot's voice softened. You are young, mademoiselle. Youth dreams greatly, and sometimes recklessly. No charges will be brought for this. The map fragment remains with the family, and the decision of what to do with it is Lady Evelyn's. He replaced the fragile paper carefully in its hidden compartment and closed the catch. Lady Evelyn spoke at last, her voice steady. The treasure, if it still exists, belongs to the people of India. I shall consult the Indian High Commission and arrange for the fragment to be handed over, along with any information we possess. The brooch itself, if Diana's claim is upheld, will go to her. And the curse, I think, is lifted at last. She looked round the room, meeting each gaze. We have all been prisoners of this jewel for too long. Inspector Jarvis closed his notebook with a snap. A remarkable case, Mr. Poirot. I'll be off to Exeter then. The 3 men will face charges for conspiracy and attempted theft, but the rest, well, that's family business. He departed, leaving a profound silence. Poirot bowed to Lady Evelyn. My work here is finished, madame. The emerald secret is secret no longer, and justice, of a kind, is served. He turned to leave, then paused. "One last observation. Treasures are dangerous things. Sometimes the greatest wealth is to be free of them." With that, Hercule Poirot walked out into the crisp December sunlight, his figure neat and precise against the winter lawns. Behind him, the ancient house seemed to breathe more easily, as though a long shadow had finally lifted. The emerald brooch, guardian of a century-old secret, lay quietly on its velvet cushion, beautiful, innocent, and at peace. Chapter 8. Justice in the Dawn. The frost still glittered on the lawns of Harrington Hall when Hercule Poirot descended the great staircase for the last time. It was barely 7 o'clock on a crisp December morning, and the house was quiet, as though holding its breath after the storms of the past days. A footman had laid a small breakfast for him in the morning room: coffee, croissants, and a single perfect pear. Poirot ate with his usual precision, then folded his napkin and rose. Lady Evelyn was waiting for him in the hall, wrapped in a heavy travelling cloak. Beside her stood Diana Clements, a valise at her feet. The two women had clearly reached an understanding in the night. "Monsieur Poirot," Lady Evelyn said, extending her hand, "I do not know how to thank you. You have given us back far more than a jewel. You have given us truth and perhaps peace." Poirot bowed over her hand. "Madame, it is the truth alone that sets us free. The brooch is now yours to dispose of, as honour dictates." She touched the small leather case she carried. Inside lay the emerald brooch, its secret compartment empty. The fragile map fragment had already been photographed and sealed in an envelope addressed to the Indian High Commission in London. "I shall deliver it personally," she said, "and the brooch itself, after the legal formalities, will go to Diana. It is only right." Miss Clements coloured. "I never sought it for its value, only for justice." "And justice you shall have," Lady Evelyn replied gently. A car could be heard crunching on the gravel outside, the Colonel's Daimler, come to take Poirot to the station. Before leaving, Poirot asked to speak once more with Clarissa Harrington. She was in the library, standing by the window and staring out at the wintry gardens. She turned as he entered, her young face pale and stripped of its customary cynicism. "I suppose you've come to lecture me," she said bitterly. "No, mademoiselle," Poirot replied. "I have come to understand. You are not evil, only impatient with a life that seemed too small. The dream of treasure blinded you to the treasure you already possessed. A family, a home, a future you could have shaped honourably." She bit her lip. "I was a fool. I nearly destroyed everything for a legend on a scrap of paper. Yet no real harm was done. The brooch is safe, the map will serve a greater good, and you have learned a lesson that many never learn. That is not failure. It is salvation." Clarissa managed a watery smile. "Father says I must go abroad for a year. Stay with cousins in Canada. He thinks distance will cure me." Poirot nodded approvingly. "Distance and honest work, mademoiselle. They are excellent physicians." He left her gazing out at the frost and went to bid farewell to the Colonel, who stood stiffly in the hall. "Damned unpleasant business," the Colonel muttered, "but you handled it squarely, Poirot. Family's grateful." Poirot inclined his head. "Families, mon Colonel, are like old houses. They creak, they settle, they harbour secrets in their walls, but with light and air they endure." The car bore him down the long drive beneath bare oaks. As Harrington Hall dwindled in the rear window, Poirot permitted himself a small sigh of satisfaction. The case had been complex, layers within layers, motives tangled like old ivy, yet order had been restored. At the station he bought his ticket and settled into a first-class compartment. The train steamed southward toward London, and Poirot took from his pocket a telegram that had awaited him at the hall. It was from Inspector Jarvis, sent late the previous night. Leland, Farrar, and Vavasour charged with conspiracy to steal. All three pleaded guilty this morning. Lighter sentences likely. Leland particularly contrite. Case closed satisfactorily. My thanks. J. Poirot folded the paper and tucked it away. Justice, as he had said, had the final word, but it was a tempered justice. Geoffrey Farrar would lose his allowance and face the consequences of his debts, yet his sister's forgiveness would spare him utter ruin. Victor Leland, stripped of reputation and fortune, would serve a term in prison, a severe lesson for a greedy man. Raoul Vavasour, the professional adventurer, would be deported to France with a warning never to return. And Clarissa would grow. Time and exile would do their work. The train gathered speed. Fields and hedgerows flashed past, silvered with frost. Poirot leaned back, closed his eyes, and allowed his thoughts to drift to human nature, that endless fascination. Greed, fear, loyalty, the hunger for justice, the lure of legend, all had played their parts in the drama of the Emerald Brooch. Yet, in the end, it was decency that had prevailed. Lady Evelyn's generosity, Diana Clemence's restraint, even Clarissa's remorse. The little grey cells, Poirot murmured to himself, they serve not only to detect crime, but to illuminate the human heart. The train whistle sounded as they approached a distant town. Poirot opened his eyes and watched the world slide by. Another case concluded, another balance restored. In his neat valise lay a small gift from Lady Evelyn, a silver cigarette case engraved with the Harrington crest and the date. On its inside lid she had caused to be inscribed, in tiny elegant script, to Hercule Poirot, who brought light into our shadows, with eternal gratitude. E.H. Poirot touched it once, smiled his small, contented smile, and turned his face toward London. Outside, the sun rose higher, melting the frost into diamonds on the grass. A new day had begun, clear, cold, and full of promise. And somewhere far away, across oceans and mountains, an ancient secret was on its way to its rightful home. The curse of the Harrington Emerald was broken at last,